In this lecture, we're going to manually play the sequence after the player touches the collider component. We already prepped the code for this. All that's left is to play the animation. The question is, how? In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a class called Playable Director. This class powers the component for playing sequences. We must grab the component by using this class. If we were to look through the methods, we would find a method for playing the animation called play. Our goal becomes clear. We should grab this component and call this method when the player touches the collider. Let's switch over to Visual Studio Code. We will continue working inside the cinematic controller component. First things first, we must include the correct namespaces. If you were to look back at the documentation, the Playable Director class is available under a namespace called UnityEngine.playables. Add this namespace to the file. Next, add the RPG.utility namespace. Before playing the animation, we should verify that the player has touched the collider. Enemies may accidentally collide with the collider. They shouldn't trigger the cutscene. This namespace exposes our tags, which we'll need. Next, let's begin grabbing a reference to the Playable Director component. In the class, add a variable called Playable Director component with the Playable Director class as the type. Afterward, define the awake method. Inside this method, we can grab a component by calling the getComponent method. Set the playable variable to the getComponent Playable Director method. Grabbing a reference to the component gives us the power to control the cutscene. Let's update the onTriggerEnter method to play the cutscene. The first step is to verify the current object. The cinematic shouldn't play unless the player is colliding with the object. If another object is causing the trigger, we should avoid playing the sequence. At the moment, we don't have information on the object colliding with our player. We can access this information as a parameter. The onTriggerEnter method is given the object causing the collision. It's optional to accept this information. Add a parameter called Other with the Collider class as the type. With this information, we can check the colliding object. Replace the print statement with a conditional statement. The condition will be the following: not other.compare tag constants.player tag. Checking the object's tag is the best way to detect the player. If the other object is not the player, we can return the method to prevent further execution. Otherwise, let's play the cutscene by calling the Playable Director component.play method. This single line of code should cause the cutscene to play. Before we test our code, there's one more feature I'd like to add. Currently, the cutscene will always play whenever the player touches the collider. However, it should only play once. The player shouldn't have to repeatedly watch the cutscene every time they walk up the ramp. We can stop the cutscene from playing multiple times by disabling the collider component. Disabling this component prevents the onTriggerEnter method from executing again. Thus, the cutscene will only play once. At the top of the class, add a variable called ColliderComponent with the Collider class as the type. Next, let's update this variable from the awake method. Set this variable to the getComponent Collider method. Lastly, let's disable it from the onTriggerEnter method. After playing the cutscene, set the ColliderComponent.enabled variable to false. Setting this variable to false disables the component completely. Let's try playing our game. Head over to Unity to start the game. Let's walk up the ramp. As we do so, the cutscene starts playing. That's perfect. It's exactly what we wanted. After the cutscene is finished playing, we shouldn't be able to trigger it again. No matter how many times I walk up or down the ramp, The cutscene only plays once. We've successfully played the cutscene with code. From time to time, you may need to play cutscenes during specific events. Now you know how to do so. In the next lecture, we're going to start improving this solution.